The doorbell rings at 11:47 p.m. Two Beverly Hills police officers stand on the marble steps of 363 Copa de Oro Road. Behind them, the California night is warm and still. In front of them, the Dean Martin mansion is alive with music and laughter, crystal glasses clinking, women's heels clicking on Italian tile, the muffled roar of 100 conversations happening at once. Officer Patterson adjusts his hat. His partner checks the address one more time. "We received a noise complaint," Patterson says when the door opens. "A neighbor called." Inside, Jeanne Martin, former Orange Bowl queen, perfect hostess, the woman who had spent 6 days planning this party, stops mid-sentence. Her champagne glass freezes halfway to her lips. She knows exactly who called. Because there is no neighbor. The nearest house is half a mile away. The complaint came from inside the mansion, from a bedroom on the second floor, where Dean Martin, the king of cool, the man every guest came to see, is lying in bed, watching a Western, in his silk pajamas, at his own party. Everyone thinks Dean Martin loved the spotlight. Everyone thinks he was the ultimate entertainer, the man who lived for applause. Everyone was wrong. What Dean whispered to the dispatcher that night would become Hollywood's best-kept secret. To understand why Dean Martin called the cops on his own wife, you have to understand the lie he told the world for 40 years. The public knew him as the king of cool, the man with the perpetual drink in his hand, the effortless charm, the voice like warm honey poured over a late-night city. He was the beating heart of the Rat Pack, Frank's best friend, Sammy's brother, the guy who made Vegas feel like the center of the universe. America believed Dean Martin was born to perform, born to entertain, born to be the life of every party. But that wasn't Dean Martin. That was a character, a mask, a survival mechanism built by a shy kid from Steubenville, Ohio, who didn't speak English until he was 5 years old. "I was shy," Dean admitted once in a rare moment of honesty. "I was ashamed of the way I spoke." Dino Corsetti learned something in those steel town streets that most people never understand. The American kids laughed at his accent. They mocked the way his Italian father talked. So young Dino made a choice. He would make them laugh with him before they could laugh at him. The drunk act, the casual demeanor, the I don't care attitude, it wasn't entertainment, it was armor, and he wore it every single day of his life. Jeanne Martin was everything Dean wasn't. She was confident in crowds, she loved hosting. She had been the Orange Bowl queen in 1948, a model from Coral Gables who knew how to work a room. Their marriage worked precisely because they were opposites, but Jeanne didn't know what her husband was planning that Saturday night. Nobody did. Not yet. Saturday night at the Martin Mansion was an event. Jeanne had been planning for a week. The caterers arrived at 4. The florists at 5. By 6, the bartenders had set up 3 separate stations, one by the pool, one in the living room, one in the garden where Japanese lanterns swayed in the evening breeze. The guest list read like a Hollywood directory. Studio executives, television producers, actors whose faces appeared on billboards across Sunset Boulevard. This wasn't just a party. This was a statement. This was Jeanne Martin showing Beverly Hills what real hospitality looked like. The air filled with the scent of gardenias and expensive perfume. Crystal glasses caught the chandelier light and scattered it across the walls like diamonds. Sinatra's voice poured from the speakers, not the man himself, just his records. The real Frank might drop by later, or he might not. That was Hollywood. Dean came downstairs at 7:30 dressed in a perfect black tuxedo. His hair was immaculate, his smile was ready. He worked the room like the professional he was, shaking hands, kissing cheeks, laughing at jokes he'd heard 1,000 times before. He posed for photographs, he complimented dresses, he did everything a good host should do. For exactly 45 minutes. At 8:15 he leaned close to Jeanne's ear. "I'm gonna check on something upstairs, baby." She knew what that meant. She had seen this before. "Dean, just for a minute, honey." He didn't come back down. He didn't say goodbye to the guests. He didn't explain where he was going. He didn't apologize. He didn't check on the guests. He didn't ask if anyone needed anything. He didn't play the gracious host for one more minute. He just climbed those stairs like a man escaping a burning building. The master bedroom was Dean's sanctuary. Thick curtains blocked every sound from downstairs. A television set the biggest money could buy sat in the corner. A small refrigerator hummed quietly, stocked with Coca-Cola and leftover pasta. Dino loosened his tie, kicked off his polished shoes, peeled off the tuxedo jacket and let it fall on a chair. He changed into silk pajamas, the powder blue ones Jeanne had bought him for Christmas. He couldn't stand one more handshake. He couldn't fake one more smile. He couldn't be Dean Martin for another second. He turned on the TV. A Western was playing. John Wayne, gunfights and horses and wide-open spaces. Men who didn't have to make small talk at parties. Men who solved their problems with action, not conversation. This was heaven. Downstairs, the party grew louder, and louder, and louder. Dean turned up the television volume. It wasn't enough. He could still hear them. The laughter, the music, the endless chatter of people who apparently never got tired of talking. He pulled a pillow over his head. Still not enough. At 10:30, Rosa, the housekeeper, passed by the bedroom. She heard the television through the door. She heard Mr. Martin talking, but not to anyone in the room. She pressed her ear closer. He was on the phone. "Yes, officer. The address is 363 Copa de Oro Road." "That's right," he whispered into the receiver. "Dean Martin's house. There's a very loud party. The neighbors are trying to sleep." Rosa's hand flew to her mouth. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She backed away from the door, her heart pounding. And then she heard Mr. Martin hang up the phone. And then she heard him turn the television volume back up. And then she heard him, she was almost certain, chuckling to himself. What happened next would be erased from every gossip column in Hollywood. Almost. The dispatcher was confused. "Sir, you said this is Dean Martin's residence?" "That's right." Dean's voice was calm, pleasant, the voice of a concerned citizen. "And you're a neighbor?" "That's correct. Can I have your name?" Dean paused. His jaw tightened for just a moment. His fingers drummed once against the telephone. Then he smiled, even though no one could see it. "I'd prefer to remain anonymous, but the party is very loud. My wife, my neighbor's wife, she throws these things every month. A man can't get any sleep. We'll send someone right away, sir." "Much appreciated, pal." Dean whispered and hung up. His shoulders dropped. His breathing slowed. The tension he had been carrying all evening, the weight of being Dean Martin, the pressure of performing for 100 guests, it melted away. He reached for the bowl of popcorn on his nightstand. He turned the volume up on John Wayne. The cavalry was about to arrive on screen. So were the real police. Officer Patterson arrived at 11:47 p.m. The party was in full swing. He could hear it from the street. Music and laughter and the unmistakable sound of people having the time of their lives. His partner looked at the mansion, then at Patterson. "Dean Martin's house," the partner said. "This should be interesting." The butler answered the door. His face performed a complicated dance, confusion first, then recognition, and finally something that looked almost like amusement. "I'll get Mrs. Martin." Jeanne appeared moments later, perfectly composed, perfectly dressed. The orange bowl queen smile locked firmly in place, but her eyes were calculating, processing, understanding. She knew. Of course she knew. There were no neighbors close enough to hear anything. The nearest property was behind a hill, through a grove of eucalyptus trees. Nobody within a mile could possibly have heard this party. She didn't scream. She didn't make a scene. She didn't embarrass herself in front of the officers. She didn't let the mask slip. Not yet. Not here. Not with 100 witnesses watching. She didn't ask who called. She didn't demand an explanation. She didn't cause a scene in front of the officers. She already knew. "Officers," she said, her voice honey smooth, "I'm so sorry for the disturbance. We'll keep it down." The officers left. The party continued, but quieter now. Guests began checking their watches. Yawns spread through the crowd like a contagion. Within an hour the mansion was empty. Jeanne closed the door behind the last guest. She stood in the foyer for a long moment. The silence was deafening after all that noise. Crystal glasses sat abandoned on tables. Flower petals had fallen onto the marble floor. She looked up at the second floor, at the window where the blue light of a television flickered against the curtains, at the silhouette of a man in pajamas, watching her, watching his plan work perfectly. Jeanne climbed the stairs. Her heels echoed in the empty house. She pushed open the bedroom door. Dean was exactly where she knew he would be. Propped up against silk pillows, a bowl of popcorn on his chest, John Wayne frozen mid-sentence on the screen. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. The perfect hostess mask was cracking. "You called the police on your own party." Dean didn't look away from the screen. His voice was casual, almost lazy. The same voice that had charmed 1,000 nightclubs. "Technically," he whispered, "I called the police on your party, baby." For 3 seconds, Jeanne didn't breathe. She couldn't believe it. She couldn't be angry. She couldn't do anything but laugh. Her face went through every emotion: shock, anger, disbelief. And then she laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep. The kind that means surrender. "You're impossible, Dino. I just wanted to go to sleep, honey. You know I hate these things." "Then why didn't you just say that?" Dean finally looked at her. His eyes were soft, tired. The eyes of a shy kid from Steubenville who had spent his whole life pretending to be someone else. He shrugged. Where's the fun in that? Dean had learned something in those Ohio Steeltown streets that most people never understand. Direct confrontation is for people who don't know how to win. In the back rooms of illegal casinos, in the boxing rings where he earned $5 getting punched in the face, young Dino learned that the smartest fighter makes you beat yourself. Why argue with your wife about a party when you can simply make the party disappear? But this wasn't the last time.
It was just the beginning.
Here's the thing, nobody tells you about that story. It wasn't a one-time event. Dean Martin called the police on his own parties multiple times, maybe a dozen, maybe more. It became a pattern, a ritual, a secret that everyone in Hollywood eventually learned but no one ever discussed publicly. The guests didn't complain, they didn't question the timing, they didn't suspect their host, they just assumed some uptight neighbor had ruined the fun. Bob Newhart was there for one of them. Years later he told the story with bewildered admiration in his voice. Dean would be there for the first hour, charming everyone, absolutely brilliant, the funniest guy in the room, and then he'd disappear, just vanish, gone, and then like clockwork the cops would show up, noise complaint, they'd say, and Jeanne would apologize and we'd all have to leave, and I'd look up at the second-floor window. Newhart paused, shaking his head. There was Dino, in his pajamas, waving at us, just waving, like he was seeing off guests at a train station. The man was a genius, an absolute genius. George Schlatter had a similar memory. He produced Dean's television show for years. He thought he knew the man. He was wrong. I went to one of Jean's parties, Schlatter recalled, and I realized I didn't know Dean at all. The real Dean, the actual human being, was upstairs, watching Andy Griffith, waiting for the police to save him from his own house. He had created this whole persona, this king of cool thing, and then he had to escape from it every single night. That's the part nobody talks about. The cage was made of gold, but it was still a cage. The staff knew, of course. They always knew. Rosa, the housekeeper who had overheard that first phone call, became an expert at reading the signs. When Mr. Martin excused himself before 9 p.m., she would start preparing for an early night. When he loosened his tie on the way upstairs, she knew the police would arrive within the hour. He wasn't being rude, Rosa said years later. He was surviving. Some people need crowds to feel alive. Mr. Martin needed silence. He needed that television. He needed to be alone with his thoughts. The parties were Mrs. Martin's way of living. The bedroom was his. She paused, remembering something. He always thanked me the next morning. Always. Rosa, I'm sorry about last night. And I would say, Mr. Martin, you have nothing to be sorry for. And he would smile, that sad smile he had when the cameras weren't around, and he would say, I have everything to be sorry for, Rosa, but thank you for not saying so. Director Henry Jaglom tells the strangest story of all. He was at a Martin party in the late 60s. He went looking for the bathroom. He got lost in the mansion's endless hallways. He heard a television. He pushed open a door, and there was Dean Martin, sitting alone in the dark, the blue light of the TV washing over his face, watching the Andy Griffith show, at his own party, completely at peace. He looked up at me, Jaglom remembered, and he wasn't embarrassed at all, not even a little bit. He just patted the bed next to him and said, You want to watch with me, pal? This is a good one. Andy's teaching Opie about fishing. So I sat down. We watched together for 20 minutes, 100 people partying downstairs, and we just sat there, watching Andy Griffith. It was the most surreal experience of my life. When Jaglom finally left to rejoin the party, Dean called after him, Hey pal. Jaglom turned. Dean smiled, that famous smile, but his eyes were serious. Don't tell anyone where I am, Dean whispered, and Jaglom never did. Dean Martin wore masks his entire life. The drunk, the lover, the crooner, the king of cool. Each one carefully constructed, carefully maintained, carefully presented to a world that wanted to believe. But behind every mask was the same person. The shy kid from Steubenville. The kid who didn't speak English until he was 5. The kid who learned to make people laugh before they could laugh at him. The kid who discovered that the best way to protect yourself is to become someone else entirely. Jeanne understood eventually. She had married an entertainer, but she had fallen in love with an introvert. The man on stage, the man in the movies, the man who charmed America every Thursday night, that man was a performance. The real Dean was the one in the silk pajamas, watching westerns, eating popcorn alone in the dark. He gave everything to the audience, she said once. Every ounce of charm, every joke, every smile. And when he came home there was nothing left. He was empty. He needed to refill. And you can't refill around people. You can only refill alone. She never stopped throwing parties. He never stopped calling the police. It was their arrangement, their compromise, their strange, beautiful, completely dysfunctional love story. We all wear masks. We smile when we want to scream. We perform versions of ourselves that we think others want to see. We go to parties we don't want to attend. We make small talk with people we'll never see again. We pretend to be happy when we're exhausted. We all wish we had the courage to call the cops on our own parties, to say enough, to choose peace over performance, to climb the stairs, close the door, and watch television in our pajamas while the world we've built continues spinning without us. One phone call, 2 confused police officers, 3 little words, I'm a neighbor, and 20 years of Saturday nights ending early. That's not cowardice, that's not antisocial behavior, that's the wisdom of a man who understood something most people never learn. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is lie. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disappear. Sometimes the only way to survive the person you've become is to hide from him. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day 1995, alone, in his bedroom. The television was on. Some people thought that was sad. The king of cool, dying alone. No party, no crowds, no applause. But maybe, just maybe, that's exactly how Dino wanted it. The room was quiet. The phone wasn't ringing. Nobody was asking him to perform. Nobody was waiting for him to be Dean Martin. He could finally just be Dino Crosetti, the shy kid from Ohio, the kid who never really liked parties in the first place. He wasn't the king of cool. He was the king of I'd rather be in bed. And honestly, that's even cooler.